Good morning, everyone. So it's my pleasure to introduce the CAMS 261 Global and European Emission Services, or, well, inventories, I should say. This is the follow-on of the previously, for many of you, well-known CAMS 81 project. I'm going to apologize beforehand. I think this will be one of the most boring presentations we've been giving here because the contract for most of the people just started a week ago, so there are no results. Basically, we can tell you what we are going to work on, how we're going to do it, and some of the things you can expect. And of course, it's really good to be here and that you know that you can now reach out to us because we are alive and kicking. So what are we going to do in CAMS 261? Most of the things are as you would expect from us. So we will deliver gridded anthropogenic emissions for a European regional scale, roughly at a resolution of 6 by 6 kilometers. And those are in line with the official reported data, but on the side we also sometimes have alternative emission data available for testing, and I'll touch on that. Then an important aspect is the gridded anthropogenic emissions for the global domain. And those will be the subject of the talk after me, given by Claire. We will provide natural emissions from biogenic sources, so forests, VOC, but also soils, oceans, and volcanoes. And this is an important one. There is much more emphasis on shipping emissions in the current project because we will now also support EMSA, so the European Maritime Safety Association, in their work. So this is now, as you will see in the next slide, a separate work package. Another important thing is that we learned during the CAMS 81 that we really need to have, and it's beneficial for all, to have more interaction with the users and with the modelers in CAMS. So there is more emphasis on that. And of course, we then have the important task to document the work and make it available to everyone in a transparent and understandable way. So this is the overview of the project. So we have the management. Peter Koenen is here. Peter, raise your hand. He is the project manager for us, for TNO. And I'm sort of coordinating it more, maybe, let's say, on the science side. And then we have an emission core service where we have the anthropogenic regional emissions. Jeroen, who's there, is doing that together with me and the team at TNO. Then we have the CAMS natural global emissions. Katarina Sinderlova from Charles University. She's probably online, but she couldn't be here. She'll be leading that. Then there is the CAMS shipping emissions, which is really the new work package, led by FMI, Jukka-Pekka Jalkanen and his team. We have the anthropogenic global emissions led by Claire, who you will see right after me. And then we have two important projects, work packages outside of that. So the service evolution and support to the CAMS production systems, led by Mark Guevara, who is also in the room. And the user support and documentation service led by Miguel Gauss from Met Norway, who is also here. And you can recognize him from his Copernicus t-shirt, I think. So the partners that we have 7 partners. We're really happy that we could basically keep the team together that we have been working with very successfully over the years. And we also cover a nice range of the, let's say the European domain. So I'm really happy about this. It's a very efficient team, and I'm really grateful for that. So diving in a little bit into the regional emissions. So this is the work package that we'll be leading from TNO. So what are our first tasks just for 2022? We need to deliver an emission data set for the years 2019 and 2020. And we will do that by using the reported emissions to EMAP for the air pollutants and UNFCCC for the greenhouse gases. And they have been released 2 months ago or so. So we are now really processing those. And then, of course, we will make an analysis to differences with the previous CAMS-REG data set that was released last year. And we also investigate the COVID impact on those reported 2020 emissions as opposed to other alternative data sets that we have been making to already provide 2020 data. And that will be very interesting. And it also relates to what Richard was just talking about, for example, for the carbon monitor. Now these reported emissions become available, and we will have more. Well, we will learn a lot from that intercomparison. How good can we actually capture those activity data and those changes when we start to use other data? And of course, we need to determine and have an exchange with the CAMS 240 team, which is on regional modeling and air quality forecast, what to use also for 2021, and I'll touch on that. So as I said, there's no real work that we did under the CAMS 261 project because it's just started, but we did quite a few things in 2021 under CAMS, but also related to other projects. And one of the most important things was to look into having an alternative data set for 2021, or 2020, sorry, which was, you know, as we all know, it was no longer possible to use the previous year, which would have been 2019, as a best guess for 2020. So a lot was done in that. I don't have the time to really go into it. I just point you here to some of the, well, nice and quickly documented results that we had. And essentially the idea was that we needed reduction factors for 2020, but we also needed then a good business as usual for 2020, because you could not use 2019 for that, because there's always differences between years. For example, the climate is different, so we had a relatively warm spring, so that was not a COVID effect, that was just climate. We had a sulfur cap on shipping fuels, so you have a reduction in sulfur in 2020, which is not related to COVID. So you need to separate those things, and we actually were very successful in doing that. And maybe the key findings were, yeah, we had a serious decrease in NOx, but much less so in PM, so around only minus 2% or so. So that's really difficult to capture, but the NOx reductions were very clearly visible. And then we had this timing effect, and I'll show that in the next slide. But the preliminary investigations, and we're busy with doing that, suggest that how we captured that and we compare that to the regional currently reported data is actually quite promising. So so far, I think it's good news. And then maybe something to also highlight that what we see when we analyze the data, and we keep doing that, that actually in 2021, especially early 2021, there is still an effect of COVID, especially on road transport in various countries, because we did have a lockdown still then. We tend to forget, but it was there. So on the left-hand side, you see the picture that Richard already introduced. So we had this business as usual scenario, and we had, when we applied the COVID reduction factors that Mark Guevara worked on, we have two different maps. In the maps, you can already see the difference. But it's really important to realize that also the temporal profile over the year had changed. So normally we have these kind of, yeah, I mean, we have, for example, for road transport, you have weekday, weekend effects, but they're not different in March than they are in October, so to say. But with the lockdowns, we really had differences. And so there we also need to have a dialogue. What will we use for those time profiles? Because if you use the standard time profile, you would actually spread that reduction that happened during dedicated moments in the year, you would spread that over the year, which is not good. And the same will apply to 2021, but not as dramatic as in 2020. And then I already said that we also sometimes work on what we then call science-based bottom-up calculations, and the most well, famous and notorious, depends on your point of view, is the one where we do alternative calculations for residential combustion from wood burning. And this has been, yeah, really a long story. So we have been doing that together with modelers, showing the impact, illustrating that we get a much better understanding of where people are exposed to if we include condensable PM, which is actually PM that can be both in the vapor phase and in the particulate phase. If we include that, we get a much better understanding. And increasingly, countries adopt that, and we are following that closely, and I really think that, for example, one of the nicest things for us, from inventory compiler perspective, is now that, for example, also Poland started to adopt this, and Poland is a very big country in Europe, so now you really see that the gap between what we have in this science-based approach and the official reporting is getting smaller and smaller, and so I think that's really nice. And I'd like to say that, and also that during last year, where we had a little bit of a gap between CAMS 81 and CAMS 261, we have been able to continue working on this by a project funded by the Nordic Council, led by David Simpson. And here we have been revising those emissions and doing a critical reanalysis of all the emission factors that we use. And so this is a project outside of CAMS, but we will really be able to introduce it into the current CAMS 261 project. And then we can use that again to discuss with CAMS 240 about what is the best way forward and how should we align that for the for the air quality forecast, but it's also being used, for example, in the EMAP source-receptor relationship. So here is a nice example also where CAMS and EMAP and, basically other European, the European Commission also has an interest in this, and how this starts to merge together, I think is really, really nice. One of the things that has been on our list for a long time and that we still never had time to do, which is something we will really do now, is look more into the temporal profiles. There has been the CAMS Tempo dataset developed by Mark, which is a great new dataset, and we had these old, which you see to the left, relatively default profiles by sector that were very simple but easy to implement. And one of the things we can do now is to and that's like a no-regret option to actually improve that very simple set based on the more complicated data. So this will offer modelers more opportunities to choose. So how sophisticated do you want to be? Where can you save time? And this is something that we will do in this coming year. Then maybe a few words on the shipping emissions. I think it's very exciting that we are, again, this is another example where EMSA and CAMS now start to join forces. So I think it's beneficial for all. So we now have a revision of the shipping emissions because there have been more and new updates to the STEAM model, which is what FMI uses as a tool to estimate those emissions. And there are some challenges also in international debates on what do you use for inland shipping or national shipping versus international shipping. So those are challenges for the model developers, but what I just wanted to point out is that there have been substantial changes in how the model estimates the emissions. And you see that already if you compare the figure to the left to the right, you can see there is a change by ship type and how the emissions are being distributed. And I had a slide here where I just highlight some of the changes of these new versions. So if you look at CO2, which is in the middle, and you see that sort of green area, you see the total CO2 emissions haven't changed so much. There's a change of 3%. But for some of the other species, there's a large change. Of course, for methane at the bottom, there's a huge change because methane wasn't included and now it is included. So that's not like it's more like an additional aspect. So we will have methane emissions over the oceans now from shipping, which is a benefit. And there is some more effects of the emission factors in the model, and that affects, for example, the PM2.5 and the black carbon emissions. And from all these data, you can also have very nice time profiles over the year that we can use to also better distribute and time the emissions. So this will be a very important new aspect. And then maybe to highlight, which is really something we learned from the previous contract, that the interaction with the CAMS production systems is really important. And it's not one-way traffic, so it's not that they should tell us what to do or that we only deliver something to them and say, this is it. solve your own problems. We really need to do this together. And yeah, I think we have very good experiences and learned that this, yeah, if we integrate this even more, we will all benefit. And there were some recommendations from the interactions over the past project. I'm not going to read all of those. The slides will be shared. But it's really important that we align this development of new data sets. And also for us, there has been the timing in the different projects. You have sometimes short deadlines. We had cases where we had a new data set available, the modelers weren't able to take it up, and by the time we had a second new data set, so sometimes you just get, I think that's not the most efficient way to use resources, and this project, and this new comes to, we have time, and so we can do that better, and we're really looking forward to that interaction. A last slide is on the service evolution and support. So we really want to evaluate the consistency between the different data sets and also how they are being used outside of us in the different projects. There are a couple of success stories, I think, where we really developed new CAMS emission projects like the products, like the temporal profiles by Marco Vara, and also the interaction with the modelers on the implementation of online emission parameterizations, like, for example, the heating degree day approach. And we will touch upon that in the report from the discussions yesterday later. Finally, the update on the documentation. This will be led by Michael Gauss, and this is, of course, important. User requirement suggestions, so what do you really need from emissions, are very welcome. Just contact me, Michael Gauss, or use this email address and let us know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for this nice talk. Questions? We have a question online, so let's maybe respond to this. So Rostiflav asked for plans about emissions for cooking, heating, small-scale combustion. Maybe you can comment briefly on this.
Cooking. Yeah. So we had a very long stretch of this on terms of for the residential wood combustion. And the idea there is that part of the particulate matter condenses immediately after it leaves the chimney, and that makes it actually a much bigger PM source than if you just look at what you have when you emit it under hot conditions, so when you measure inside the chimney. Now, cooking is a similar example. It's actually not creating any solid particulate matters, but there can be a lot of vapors coming out of it, which can condense when they come outside of the chimney. And cooking is actually much more challenging than the wood combustion, because you really need atmospheric observations of, let's say, fingerprint substances to quantify it. How important is it really? And we have been investigating this. So there seems to be a big difference between commercial restaurants, where you have a lot of grilling and barbecuing, burger restaurants, versus households, but it's a challenging subject. So we really need to see what we can do under this surface. I mean, I think it's more like still a research topic, but it is on our list.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. So it's a hint for Vincent Henri not to have a barbecue at the next General Assembly. We are moving on now to Claire Granier.
Yeah, and use this also, this user requirements. If you think that's an important thing, then tell us, and that can also help us to put it forward.
Okay, thank you, Hugo.